Amphetamine, USAN or amphetamine, contracted from alpha-methylphenethylamine or methylphenethylamine, is 1-phenylpropan-2-amine or C9H13N. It exists as two enantiomers, the levorotary form levamfetamine, and dextrorotary form dexamfetamine, It is a psychostimulant drug of the phenethylamine class that produces increased wakefulness and focus in association with decreased fatigue and appetite. Amphetamine is used as a treatment for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and narcolepsy, and is typically prescribed as amphetamine mixed salts or as dextroamphetamine. It has historically been used to treat obesity. Amphetamine increases activity related to the neurotransmitters dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. This causes resistance to fatigue, elevation of mood, heightened libido, euphoria, and loss of appetite. Repeated high-dose exposure can lead to a mental state characterized by delusions, psychosis, and paranoia. The effects of amphetamines on serotonin transmission may contribute to hallucinations, appetite suppression, and hypothermia. Recreational doses are generally far larger than prescribed therapeutic doses, and recreational use therefore carries far greater risk and far more serious side effects. Amphetamine is used recreationally, both in prescription form and in pure form synthesized by clandestine chemists. It is also used as a performance enhancer and a cognitive enhancer. Amphetamine is a precursor to methamphetamine, and is therefore closely chemically related to methamphetamine. However, amphetamine differs significantly in many areas. While amphetamine is commonly prescribed to children, concerns have been raised over possible complications such as stunted growth, altered brain development, and rare episodes of psychosis. However, these concerns are still disputed, and it appears that the associated brain alterations are actually due to the presence of ADHD itself, rather than being from the stimulant use. Psychological effects. Psychological effects can include euphoria, anxiety, increased libido, alertness, concentration, energy, self-esteem, self-confidence, sociability, irritability, aggression, psychosomatic disorders, psychomotor agitation, grandiosity, repetitive and obsessive behaviors, and paranoia. With chronic and/or high doses, amphetamine psychosis can occur. Occasionally this psychosis can occur at therapeutic doses during chronic therapy as a treatment-emergent side effect. Side effects. Side effects of amphetamine are many and varied. However, the amount of amphetamine consumed is the primary factor in determining the likelihood and severity of side effects. Therapeutic use in the form of amphetamine mixed salts and dextroamphetamine is approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration for long-term pharmaceutical use. Recreational use of amphetamine generally involves far larger doses, and is therefore significantly more dangerous, involving a greater risk of serious side effects. The long-term effects of amphetamine's use on neural development in children has not been well established. A study conducted on rats indicated that exposure to amphetamine during adolescence impairs working memory in comparison to exposure in adulthood, suggesting that adolescents are more prone to the neuroplastic effects of amphetamine. Physical side effects. Physical effects of amphetamine can include dilated pupils, vasoconstriction or vasodilation, tachycardia, or bradycardia, hypertension, or hypotension, bloodshot eyes, flushing, erectile dysfunction, restlessness, dry mouth, bruxism, headache, tachypnea, fever, diaphoresis, diarrhea, constipation, blurred vision, dizziness, reduced seizure threshold, insomnia, numbness, palpitations, arrhythmias, tics, dry and/or itchy skin, acne, and pallor. Effects of extremely high doses can include coma, rhabdomyolysis, adrenergic storm, and stereotypy. Dangerous physical side effects are exceedingly rare in typical pharmaceutical doses. Recent studies by the FDA indicate that, in children, young adults, and adults, there is no association between serious adverse cardiovascular events, sudden death, myocardial infarction, and stroke, and the use of amphetamines or other ADHD stimulants. Contraindications. Amphetamine can elevate cardiac output and blood pressure, making it potentially dangerous for use by patients with a history of heart disease or hypertension. Amphetamine can cause potentially life-threatening complications in patients taking monoamine oxidase inhibitors, MAOIs, as both MAOIs and amphetamine increase the level of catecholamines in the body. The use of amphetamine and amphetamine-like drugs is contraindicated in patients with narrow-angle glaucoma or anatomically narrow angles. Like other sympathomimetic amines, amphetamine can induce transient mydriasis. And patients with narrow angles, pupillary dilation can provoke an attack of angle closure glaucoma. These agents should also be avoided in patients with other forms of glaucoma, as mydriasis may occasionally increase intraocular pressure. Amphetamine has been shown to pass through into breast milk. Because of this, mothers taking amphetamine are advised to avoid breastfeeding during their course of treatment. Psychosis. Abuse of amphetamines can result in a stimulant psychosis that can present as a number of psychotic disorders, for instance paranoia, hallucinations, delusions. A Cochrane collaboration review on treatment for amphetamine, dextroamphetamine, and methamphetamine-induced psychosis states that about 5–15% of users failed to recover completely, age needed. The same review asserts that, based upon at least one trial, antipsychotic medications effectively resolve the symptoms of acute amphetamine psychosis. Cardiac. Amphetamines have been shown to increase both systolic and diastolic blood pressure, and act as myocardial stimulants when administered orally. Some individuals may experience a reflexive slowing of heart rate, but at large doses arrhythmias have been noted. Renal failure may occur secondarily to the dehydration and rhabdomyolysis that can result from acute amphetamine toxicity. Dehydration and compromised renal function can further cause fluctuations in fluid and electrolytes, particularly potassium. Increased bladder sphincter tone may lead to symptoms of dysuria, hesitancy and acute urinary retention. Dilation of renal vasculature, along with an increase in heart contractility, increases an individual's risk of cardiogenic shock. Respiratory. Amphetamines stimulate the medullary respiratory centers, which increases the rate of respiration, and produces deeper breaths. In a normal individual, amphetamines do not noticeably increase the rate of respiration or produce deeper breaths, but when respiration is already compromised, amphetamines may stimulate respiration. Prior treatment with rezapine or guanethidine prevents the pulmonary effects of amphetamines. Chronic use of amphetamines can cause pulmonary hypertension, dependence and addiction. Tolerance is developed rapidly in amphetamine abuse, therefore, periods of extended use require increasing amounts of the drug, in order to achieve the same effect. Withdrawal effects. Withdrawal symptoms of amphetamine consist primarily of mental fatigue, mental depression and increased appetite. Symptoms may last for days with occasional use and weeks or months with chronic use, with severity dependent on the length of time and the amount of amphetamine used. Withdrawal symptoms may also include anxiety, agitation, excessive sleep, vivid or lucid dreams, deep REM sleep and suicidal ideation. Overdose. An amphetamine overdose is rarely fatal with appropriate care, but can lead to a number of different symptoms, including psychosis, chest pain, and hypertension. Mechanism of action. Primary sites of action. Amphetamine exerts its behavioral effects by modulating several key neurotransmitters in the brain, including dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. However, the activity of amphetamine throughout the brain appears to be site-specific. Certain receptors that respond to amphetamine in some regions of the brain tend not to do so in other regions. For instance, dopamine D2 receptors in the hippocampus, a region of the brain associated with forming new memories, appear to be unaffected by the presence of amphetamine. The major neural systems affected by amphetamine are largely implicated in the brain's reward circuitry. Moreover, neurotransmitters involved in various reward pathways of the brain appear to be the primary targets of amphetamine. One such neurotransmitter is dopamine, a chemical messenger heavily active in the mesolimbic and mesocortical reward pathways. Therefore, the anatomical components of these pathways, including the striatum, the nucleus accumbens, and the ventral striatum, have been found to be primary sites of amphetamine action. Amphetamine, specifically dextroamphetamine, also appears to enhance acetylcholine release. One study has shown that, at high therapeutic, 1 mg/kg, and supratherapeutic, 2 mg/kg, doses respectively, acetylcholine levels increased up to 110% and 210% in the hippocampus, and up to 35% and 54% in the caudate nucleus. It is believed that the mechanism by which amphetamine heightens acetylcholine release is through agonization of dopamine receptor D1. This heightened cholinergic activity is likely to contribute to at least some part of the nootropic effects that amphetamine has on memory and learning. The fact that amphetamine influences neurotransmitter activity specifically in regions implicated in reward provides insight into the behavioral consequences of the drug, such as the stereotyped onset of euphoria. A better understanding of the specific mechanisms by which amphetamine operates may increase our ability to treat amphetamine addiction and possibly other addictions, because the brain's reward circuitry has been widely implicated in addictions of many types. Related endogenous compounds. Amphetamine has been found to have several endogenous analogues, that is, molecules of a similar structure found naturally in the brain. Examples include phenethylamine and the amino acid L-phenylalanine. An isomer of amphetamine, that is identical molecular formula, N-methylphenethylamine, has been found in human lung tissue, where it is metabolized from phenethylamine by phenylethylamine N-methyltransferase. These molecules are thought to modulate levels of excitement and alertness, among other related affective states. Dopamine. The most widely studied neurotransmitter with regard to amphetamine action in the central nervous system is dopamine. All of the addictive drugs appear to enhance synaptic dopamine, including amphetamine and methamphetamine. Studies have shown that, in certain brain regions, amphetamine increases the concentrations of dopamine in the synaptic cleft, thereby heightening the response of the postsynaptic neuron. The specific mechanisms by which amphetamine affects dopamine concentrations have been studied extensively. Currently, two major hypotheses have been proposed, which are not mutually exclusive. One theory emphasizes amphetamine's actions on the vesicular level, increasing concentrations of dopamine in the cytosol of the presynaptic neuron. The other focuses on the role of the dopamine transporter DAT, and proposes that amphetamine may interact with DAT to induce reverse transport of dopamine from the presynaptic neuron into the synaptic cleft. The former hypothesis is backed by studies from David Sulz's lab at Columbia University demonstrating that injections of amphetamine result in rapid increases of cytosolic dopamine concentrations, while the drug decreases the number of dopamine molecules inside the synaptic vesicle. Amphetamine is a substrate for a specific neuronal synaptic vesicle uptake transporter called VMAT2. When amphetamine is taken up by VMAT2, the vesicle releases dopamine molecules into the cytosol in exchange. The redistributed dopamine is then believed to interact with DAT to promote reverse transport. Amphetamine and amphetamine derivatives are also weak bases that accept protons, and can collapse acidic pH gradients in the vesicles that would otherwise provide free energy for neurotransmitter accumulation. The weak base hypothesis of amphetamine action suggests that collapse of this free energy contributes to redistribution of dopamine from very high, molar, concentrations in the vesicles to the cytosol. Calcium may be a key molecule involved in the interactions between amphetamine and VMATs. The increase of cytosolic dopamine appears to trigger neurotoxicity, as dopamine readily auto-oxidizes, so that amphetamine or methamphetamine's increase in cytosolic dopamine can lead to oxidative stress in the cytosol that in turn promotes autophagy-related degradation of dopamine axons and dendrites. The second hypothesis of amphetamine action on the plasma membrane dopamine transporter postulates a direct interaction between amphetamine and the DAT. The activity of DAT is believed to depend on specific phosphorylating kinases, such as protein kinase C, to be specific PKC. Upon phosphorylation, DAT undergoes a conformational change that results in the transport of DAT-bound dopamine from the extracellular to the intracellular environment. In the presence of amphetamine, however, DAT has been observed to function in reverse, spitting dopamine out of the presynaptic neuron and into the synaptic cleft. Thus, beyond inhibiting reuptake of dopamine, amphetamine also stimulates the release of dopamine molecules into the synapse. In support of the above hypothesis, it has been found that PKC inhibitors eliminate the effects of amphetamine on extracellular dopamine concentrations in the striatum of rats. This data suggests that the PKC kinase may represent a key point of interaction between amphetamine and the DAT transporter. Additional actions of amphetamine contribute to its ability to release dopamine from neurons. These include its being an inhibitor of monoamine oxidase, an enzyme responsible for dopamine breakdown in the cytosol, its ability to enhance dopamine synthesis due to actions on the enzyme tyrosine hydroxylase, the enzyme responsible for synthesizing the precursor of dopamine, L-dopa, and some blockade of the DAT, an action that amphetamine shares with cocaine. Due to the combination of these actions and its long half-life, amphetamine can release far more dopamine than can cocaine or other addictive drugs. Serotonin. Amphetamine has been found to exert similar effects on serotonin as on dopamine. Like DAT, the serotonin transporter SERT can be induced to operate in reverse upon stimulation by amphetamine. This mechanism is thought to rely on the actions of calcium ions, as well as on the proximity of certain transporter proteins. The interaction between amphetamine and serotonin is apparent only in particular regions of the brain, such as the mesocortical limbic projection. Recent studies suggest that amphetamine may indirectly alter the behavior of glutamatergic pathways extending from the ventral tegmental area to the prefrontal cortex, by increasing inhibitory serotonin receptor activity on glutamatergic neurons. Glutamatergic pathways are strongly correlated with increased excitability at the level of the synapse. Increased extracellular concentrations of serotonin may thus modulate the excitatory activity of glutamatergic neurons. The proposed ability of amphetamine to decrease excitability of glutamatergic pathways may be of significance when considering the role of serotonin in addiction, evidence of which has been quickly accumulating. An additional behavioral consequence of postulated serotonergic effects of amphetamine may be alterations in the stereotyped locomotor stimulation that occurs in response to amphetamine exposure. Despite this, at least one study suggests that serotonergic effects are not necessary for the development of stereotypy in rodents treated with stimulants. 2 studies on the brains of rats and cats have shown that, at extremely high doses, the 7th of May 10 mg/kg, amphetamine reduces the activity of brain tryptophan hydroxylase, an enzyme involved in the biosynthesis of serotonin and melatonin. Interestingly, other studies have demonstrated that pretreatment with L-tryptophan, 100 mg/kg, reduces the quantity of self-administered amphetamine, 0.125 mg/kg per administration, a low therapeutic dose in humans, in rats which have established stable self-administration patterns. Moreover, the magnitude and duration of the L-tryptophan pretreatment effect was observed to increase in a dose-dependent manner. Other relevant neurotransmitters. Several other neurotransmitters have been linked to amphetamine activity. It is well established that amphetamine causes increased brain and blood levels of norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter related to adrenaline. This is believed to occur via reuptake blockage as well as via interactions with the norepinephrine neuronal transport carrier. Many in vitro studies have demonstrated that amphetamine binds to and inhibits reuptake of norepinephrine, noradrenaline, via norepinephrine transporter expressed on the cell membranes of primary neurons and cell lines. In addition, amphetamine acts as a substrate for the transporter, being moved from the outside to the inside of the cell via the transporter. Once inside the cell, amphetamine can bind to VMAT2 on neurotransmitter-containing vesicles, and via actions that are not well understood amphetamine increases release of norepinephrine. In addition, extracellular levels of glutamate, the primary excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain, have been shown to increase upon exposure to amphetamine. Consistent with other findings, this effect was found in the areas of the brain implicated in reward, namely, the nucleus accumbens, striatum, and prefrontal cortex. Pharmacology. Chemical properties. Amphetamine is a chiral compound. The racemic mixture can be divided into its optical isomers, levo and dextroamphetamine. Amphetamine is the parent compound of its own structural class, comprising a broad range of psychoactive derivatives, from empathogens, MDA, 3,4-methylenedioxyamphetamine, and MDMA, 3,4-methylenedioxy-N-methylamphetamine, known as ecstasy, to the N-methylated form. methamphetamine known as meth, and to decongestants such as ephedrine, F. Amphetamine is a homolog of phenethylamine. In organic chemistry, amphetamine was found as excellent chiral ligand for stereoselective synthesis of 1,1-B2-naphthol. Pharmacodynamics. Amphetamine has been shown to both diffuse through the cell membrane and travel via the dopamine transporter, DAP, to increase concentrations of dopamine in the neuronal terminal. Amphetamine, both as D-amphetamine, dextroamphetamine, and L-amphetamine, or a racemic mixture of the two isomers, is believed to exert its effects by binding to the monoamine transporters and increasing extracellular levels of the biogenic amines dopamine, norepinephrine, noradrenaline, and serotonin. It is hypothesized that D-amphetamine acts primarily on the dopaminergic systems, while L-amphetamine is norepinephrinergic, noradrenergic. The primary reinforcing and behavioral stimulant effects of amphetamine, however, are linked to enhanced dopaminergic activity, primarily in the mesolimbic dopamine system. Amphetamine and other amphetamine-type stimulants act, principally to release dopamine into the synaptic cleft. Amphetamine, unlike dopamine transporter inhibitor cocaine, acts as a substrate for DAT and slows reuptake by a secondary acting mechanism through the phosphorylation of dopamine transporters. A primary action of amphetamine is mediated by vesicular monoamine transporters, VMATs. The transporters appear to provide a channel through which dopamine and other transmitters can exit the vesicle to the cytosol. According to the weak base hypothesis, this is exacerbated by amphetamine acting to alkalinize the vesicle, which depletes the free energy favoring vesicle accumulation, so that transmitter is redistributed to the cytosol. Together, these actions cause the release of dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin from monoamine vesicles, thereby increasing cytosolic concentrations of transmitter. This increase in concentration assists in the reverse transport of dopamine via the dopamine transporter, DAP, into the synapse. In addition, amphetamine binds reversibly to the DAPs and blocks the transporter's ability to clear DA from the synaptic space. Amphetamine also acts in this way with norepinephrine, noradrenaline, and to a lesser extent serotonin. Amphetamine has been identified as a potent agonist of trace amine-associated receptor 1, TAR1, a newly discovered GPCR important for regulation of monoaminergic systems in the brain. Activation of TAR1 increases CAMP production via adenylyl cyclase activation, and inhibits transporter function. These effects increase efflux of dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin and prolong the amount of time these monoamines remain in the synapse. Pharmacokinetics. The half-life of amphetamines varies with age and stereochemistry. The dextrorotary amphetamine, D, also DNS, is processed faster than the levorotary amphetamine, L, also L and R, form. In adults, the half-life for the D form is 10 hours and the L form is 13 hours. For ages 13 to 17, the half-life is D, L, 11-13-14 hours. For children 9 to 12 years of age, the half-life of the drug is D, L, 9-11. Metabolism occurs mostly in the liver by the cytochrome P450, CYP, detoxification system. The ISA enzymes CYP2C9, CYP1A2, CYP2D6, CYP3A4 along with flavin monooxygenases are the primary metabolic enzymes. Deamination of amphetamine into phenylacetone, an inert metabolite, is performed by CYP2C. Other breakdown pathways in the liver include dealkylation and demethylation. These produce a variety of excreted metabolic products, some of which are also biologically active, including para-hydroxyamphetamine, hippuric acid, merephedrine and p-hydroxynorephédrine. Amphetamine is eliminated renally with 70% of the drug being cleared in 24 hours, with a fraction of the drug being excreted unchanged, 0.21, 0.45. This process is dependent on urinary pH. Amphetamine is a weak base with a pK of 9 to 10. Consequently, when the urinary pH is basic, more of the drug is in its free base form and less is excreted. Apparent half-life and duration of effect increase with repeated use and accumulation of drug. History. Amphetamine was first synthesized in 1887 by the Romanian chemist Lazar Adolino in Berlin, Germany. He named the compound phenylisopropylamine. It was one of a series of compounds related to the plant derivative ephedrine, which had been isolated from the plant mahuang, ephedra, that same year by Nagayoshi Nagai. No pharmacological use was found for amphetamine until 1927, when pioneer psychopharmacologist Gordon Alls resynthesized and tested it on himself, in search of an artificial replacement for ephedrine. From 1933 or 1934 Smith, Klein and French began selling the volatile base form of the drug as an inhaler under the trade name Benzedrine, useful as a decongestant, but readily usable for other purposes. One of the first attempts at using amphetamine as a scientific study was done by M.H. Mathematician, a Los Angeles physician, in 1935. He studied the subjective effects of amphetamine in 55 hospital workers who were each given 20 milligrams of benzedrine. The two most commonly reported drug effects were a sense of well-being, and a feeling of exhilaration, and lessened fatigue and reaction to work. During World War II, amphetamine was extensively used to combat fatigue and increase alertness in soldiers. After decades of reported abuse, the FDA banned benzedrine inhalers and limited amphetamine to prescription use in 1965, but non-medical use remained common. Amphetamine became a Schedule II drug in the USA under the Controlled Substances Act in 1971. The related compound methamphetamine, in its crystallized form, was first synthesized from ephedrine in Japan in 1920 by chemist Akira Ogata, via reduction of ephedrine using red phosphorus and iodine. The pharmaceutical Pervitin was a tablet of 3 mg methamphetamine that was available in Germany from 1938 and widely used in the war-matched, but by mid-1941 it became a controlled substance. Despite this new classification, methamphetamine and the cocaine derivative referred to as codeine D9 were distributed by military doctors across both the Western and Eastern theaters of war. During the course of the war, over 200 million Pervitin pills were prescribed to war-matched combatants. In 1997 and 1998, researchers at Texas A&M University claimed to have found amphetamine and methamphetamine in the foliage of two acacia species native to Texas, A. burlanderi and A. rigidula. Previously, both of these compounds had been thought to be human inventions. These findings have never been duplicated, and the analyses are believed by many biochemists to be the result of experimental error, and as such the validity of the report has come into question. Alexander Shulgin, one of the most experienced biochemical investigators and the inventor of many novel psychotropic substances, has tried to contact the Texas A&M researchers and verify their findings. The authors of the paper have not responded. Natural amphetamine remains an unconfirmed discovery. Performance-enhancing use. Adderall, an amphetamine mixture, is used by some college and high school students as a study and test-taking aid. Amphetamine works by increasing energy levels, concentration, and motivation, thus allowing students to study for an extended period of time. In addition, amphetamine is also used by some professional, collegiate, and high school athletes for its strong stimulant effect. Energy levels are perceived to be dramatically increased and sustained, which is believed to allow for more vigorous and longer play. At low to moderate therapeutic doses, 10 to 40 milligrams, amphetamine has been shown to increase physical strength, stamina, and endurance in numerous studies. However, the presence and magnitude of associated increases appear to be sensitive to both the dosage and timing of administered amphetamine relative to the tests. While the mechanism of augmentation isn't examined in these studies, it is known that amphetamines affect some of the neurotransmitter systems that mediate physical processes during exercise, namely noradrenaline, adrenaline, and acetylcholine. Amphetamine and amphetamine derivatives such as methamphetamine have been, and are still, used by militaries around the world. British troops used 72 million amphetamine tablets in the Second World War, and the RAF used so many that methadone won the Battle of Britain, according to one report. American bomber pilots use amphetamine, go pills to stay awake during long missions. The Tarnack Farm incident, in which an American F-16 pilot killed several friendly Canadian soldiers on the ground, was blamed by the pilot on his use of amphetamine. An on-judicial hearing rejected the pilot's claim. Amphetamine use has historically been especially common among Major League Baseball players, and is usually known by the slang term greenies. In 2006, the MLB banned the use of amphetamine. The ban is enforced through periodic drug testing. However, the MLB has received some criticism, because the consequences for amphetamine use are dramatically less severe than for anabolic steroid use, with the first offense bringing only a warning and further testing. Amphetamine was formerly in widespread use by truck drivers, to combat symptoms of somnolence and to increase their concentration during driving, especially in the decades prior to the signing by former President Ronald Reagan of Executive Order 12564, which initiated mandatory random drug testing of all truck drivers and employees of other regulated industries. Although implementation of the order on the trucking industry was kept to a gradual rate in consideration of its projected effects on the national economy, in the decades following the order, amphetamine and other drug abuse by truck drivers has since dropped drastically. See also truck driver implementation of drug detection. Detection in body fluids. Amphetamine is frequently measured in urine as part of a drug test, in plasma or serum, to confirm a diagnosis of poisoning in hospitalized victims, or in whole blood, to assist in the forensic investigation of a traffic or other criminal violation or a case of sudden death. Techniques such as immunoassay may cross-react with a number of sympathomimetic drugs, so chromatographic methods specific for amphetamine should be employed to prevent false positive results. Chiral techniques may be employed to help distinguish the source of the drug, whether obtained legally, via prescription, or illicitly, or possibly as a result of formation from a prodrug such as dexamfetamine or selegiline. Chiral separation is needed to assess the possible contribution of L-methamphetamine, fixing HALA, toward a positive test result. Society and culture. The hippie counterculture was very critical of amphetamines due to the behaviors they cause. In an interview with the Los Angeles Free Press in 1965, beat writer Allen Ginsberg commented that speed is antisocial, paranoid-making, it's a drag, all the nice gentle dope fiends are getting screwed up by the real horror monster Frankenstein speed freaks who are going around stealing and bad-mouthing everybody. However, he also acknowledged that he had used it to stay up all night writing. In literature, the writers of the Beat generation used amphetamine extensively, mainly under the Benzedrine brand name. Jack Kerouac was a particularly avid user of amphetamine, which was said to provide him with the stamina needed to work on his novels for extended periods of time. Scottish author Ivan Welsh often portrays drug use in his novels, though in one of his journalism works he comments on how drugs, including amphetamine, have become part of consumerism, and how his novels Trainspotting and Porno reflect the changes in drug use and culture during the years that elapse between the two texts. Amphetamine is frequently mentioned in the work of American journalist Hunter S. Thompson. Speed not only appears among the inventory of drugs Thompson consumed for what could broadly be defined as recreational purposes, but also receives frequent, explicit mention as an essential component of his writing toolkit, such as in his author's note in Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72. One afternoon about 3 days ago, the publishers showed up at my door with no warning, and loaded about 40 pounds of supplies into the room, 2 cases of Mexican beer, 4 quarts of gin, a dozen grapefruits, and enough speed to alter the outcome of 6 Super Bowls. Meanwhile, with the final chapter still unwritten, and the press is scheduled to start rolling in 24 hours, unless somebody shows up pretty soon with extremely powerful speed, there might not be a final chapter. About 4 fingers of King Hell Crank would do the trick, but I am not optimistic. In music, the Northern Soul and mod subcultures in England were known for their characteristic amphetamine use. Their concerts generally involved people taking amphetamines to keep dancing all night. One DJ, Roger Eagle, got out of the Northern Soul scene saying, all they wanted was fast-tempo black dance music, but they were too blocked on amphetamines to articulate exactly which Jackie Wilson record they wanted me to play. Many songs have been written about amphetamine, for example in the track, entitled Street Tides Heaven from singer-songwriter Elliott Smith's self-titled album. Semi-Charmed Life by Third Eye Blind also references amphetamine. Another blatant example would be the song simply labeled Amphetamine by alternative rock band Everclear, the song $20 Nosebleed by the pop rock band Fall Out Boy, and the song Head First for Halos by My Chemical Romance. It has also influenced the aesthetics of many rock and roll bands, especially in the garage rock, mod R&B, death rock, punk/hardcore, gothic rock and extreme heavy metal genres. Husker Du, Jesus and Mary Chain and the Who were keen amphetamine users early in their existence. Hollywood Undead references the drug as a negative effect in the song City off their breakout album Swan Songs. Land Speed Record is an allusion to Husker Du's amphetamine use. Amphetamine was widely abused in the 1980s underground punk rock scene. Punk rock band NOFX have incorporated references to amphetamines and other stimulants, the two most obvious being the song 3 on Speed from the Surfer 8 LP, in reference to the three guys being on amphetamine while recording the album, and earlier the album The Longest Line is in reference to a line of amphetamine ready for insufflation. The Rolling Stones referenced the drug in their song Can't You Hear Me Knocking on the album Sticky Fingers, You Got Cocaine Eyes / Yeah, Ya Got Speed Freak Jive Now. Lou Reed refers explicitly to the drug on his album Berlin, in the song How Do You Think It Feels? Reed's band The Velvet Underground, a creation of Andy Warhol's Factory Years, was fueled by amphetamines, as well as naming their second album White Light / White Heat after the drug, and making reference to the song in Sister May. The pulp song Sorted for Ease and Whiz refers to British slang terms for ecstasy and amphetamines. English gothic rock band The Sisters of Mercy refers to the drug in their song Amphetamine Logic from their first album, First and Last and Always, and their singer Andrew Eldritch used amphetamines repeatedly. The Byrds referenced amphetamines in the 1968 song Artificial Energy on the album The Notorious Byrd Brothers. Many rock and roll bands have named themselves after amphetamine and drug slang surrounding it. For example, mod revivalists, the Purple Hearts named themselves after the amphetamine tablets popular with mods during the 1960s, as did the Australian band of the same name during the mid-1960s. The Amphetamines, a ska punk band, are also named after amphetamine, but also imitate its effects. Vague, Dexy's Midnight Runners, of number one hit Come On Eileen, are named after Dexedrine. Motorhead derived their name from the song of the same name, originally by Hawkwind where Ian Lemmy Kilmister was on bass, before leaving to form Motorhead. Lemmy Kilmister is a long-term user of speed. Danny Brown's album 30 contains many references to Adderall with such tracks such as Adderall Adderall. In film, producer David O. Selznick was an amphetamine user, and would often dictate long and rambling memos under the influence of amphetamine to his directors. The documentary Shadowing the Third Man relates that Selznick introduced the Third Man director Carol Reed to the use of amphetamine, which allowed Reed to bring the picture in below budget and on schedule by filming nearly 22 hours at a time. The title of the 2009 movie Amphetamine plays on the double meaning of the word in Chinese. Besides the name for the drug, it also means "isn't this his fate," which figuratively ties to the movie's plot. The word is transliterated as amphetamine, and as commonly happens with transliteration of non-Chinese terms, each character has independent meaning as an individual unrelated word. In mathematics, perhaps the most notable example of this is Paul Erdős, one of the most prolific and successful mathematicians in human history. He took amphetamine and methylphenidate from the age of 58, when a doctor prescribed them to him to allay the depression associated with his mother's death, until his death at the age of 83. He had previously sustained himself on copious amounts of coffee and caffeine pills. Erdős took amphetamine despite the concern of his friends, one of whom, Ron Graham, bet him $500 that he could not stop taking the drug for a month. Erdős won the bet, but complained, "You've showed me I'm not an addict. But I didn't get any work done. I'd get up in the morning and stare at a blank piece of paper. I'd have no ideas, just like an ordinary person. You've set mathematics back a month." He promptly resumed his amphetamine use. Legal status. In the United Kingdom, amphetamines are regarded as Class B drugs. The maximum penalty for unauthorized possession is 5 years in prison and an unlimited fine. The maximum penalty for illegal supply is 14 years in prison and an unlimited fine. In the Netherlands, amphetamine and methamphetamine are listed drugs of the opium law, but the dextroisomer of amphetamine is indicated for AD/AD and narcolepsy and available for prescription as 5 and 10 mg generic tablets, and 5 and 10 mg gel capsules. In the United States, amphetamine and methamphetamine are Schedule II drugs, classified as CNS, central nervous system, stimulants. A Schedule II drug is classified as one that has a high potential for abuse, has a currently accepted medical use, and is used under severe restrictions, and has a high possibility of severe psychological and physiological dependence. In Canada, possession of amphetamines is a criminal offence under Schedule A of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, with a maximum penalty for repeat offenders of fines of up to $2,000, imprisonment for up to 1 year, or both. In Australia, the dextroisomer of amphetamine is sold under the name dexamfetamine, and is a Schedule 8 controlled drug, available for certain indications with authority, illegal to possess otherwise. In India, the drug is included in the psychotropic drugs listed by the Narcotics Bureau. In Japan, the use, production, and import of any medicine containing amphetamine are prohibited. Internationally, amphetamine is a Schedule II drug under the Convention on Psychotropic Substances. Prodrugs. A number of substances have been shown to produce amphetamine and/or methamphetamine as metabolites, including amphochloral, amfetamine, benzphetamine, clobenzorex, dimethylamphetamine, ethylamphetamine, famprofazone, phencoamine, phenethylamine, phenproporex, furfenorex, lisdexamfetamine, methanorex, mesocarb, prenilamine, propylamphetamine, and silegiline, among others. These compounds may produce positive results for amphetamine on drug tests. Pharmaceutical products. Amphetamine is most commonly prescribed as amphetamine mixed salts, but it is also prescribed as dextroamphetamine, benzphetamine and lisdexamfetamine. Benzphetamine and lisdexamfetamine are structurally different from amphetamine, but metabolize into it. Brand names of medications that contain, or metabolize into, amphetamine include Adderall, amphetamine mixed salts; Dexedrine, dextroamphetamine; Dextroamphet, dextroamphetamine; Dextrostat, dextroamphetamine; Didrex, benzphetamine; Procentra, dextroamphetamine; Vyvanse, lisdexamfetamine; Benzedrine, psychodrine, and Abestrol are examples of past pharmaceutical amphetamine formulations. Derivatives. Amphetamine derivatives, often referred to as amphetamines or substituted amphetamines, are chemicals that contain amphetamine as a backbone. Some, such as methamphetamine, are also stimulants, while others, like those in the darks class, have a serotonergic psychedelic effect. This class of chemicals is sometimes referred to collectively as the amphetamine family. Smuggling. 213 kilograms of amphetamine worth $40 million, nearly $11 million, was seized by the United Arab Emirates Drug Combat Authorities on 30 November 2011 from an Iranian ship that was supposed to deliver the consignment in Malaysia, and made a port stop in Sharjah. The Gulf News published on 30 November 2011, saying this is the biggest drug bust of its kind in 2011 and the second big one in the last 3 years worldwide, said Dr. Wadia Marlouf, international expert at the United Nations Drug and Crime Office. Expert at the United Nations Drug and Crime Office. Expert at the United Nations Drug and Crime Office. Expert at the United Nations Drug and Crime Office. Expert at the United Nations Drug and Crime Office.